Hi, so I just want to take a bit of time to talk about status. So today I'm going to talk about status itself, and then I'm going to go and talk a little bit around status, identity, and goals, and how that influences impacts us. And then I'm going to talk a little bit around status and comparison. So over the next couple of weeks or the next few presentations, I'm going to cover off on a few of those things to give you a better understanding of the impact that status has on us and how to change the way you do things to improve your outcomes and make sure that you're not being dragged into this sort of status competition or a status game. So status itself is something that is primitive to us. It's an evolutionary thing. It's something that we use for survival and it does have an actual importance to us. So I talk a lot about the races that I do. I've spoken previously about races I've done in the past. So when I did the Yukon Arctic Ultra, which was around about 750 kilometers walking through the snow on foot, dragging my own polk, at that point in time I was the first Australian to do it. Okay, so it would be easy for me to go and talk about, I'm the first Australian, this is my status, check me out, look how good I am, type of thing. And at that point in time, I didn't actually really tell anybody. I've sort of spoken about it since. But at that point in time, I didn't go and promote it at all to anyone. I was quite silent about it, and there were some restrictions around what I was doing at that point anyway. But I didn't use that as a status symbol because other people had done it before me. So really, if I'm looking to be the first Australian, then I'm just cherry picking data to make myself more important, or I'm cherry picking something to make myself more important. Just because I'm the first doesn't mean that I'm the only person that could do it, or it really has no importance to anything. It would just be something that I was using as a symbol of status. And then the race that I'm doing now, I'm potentially going to be one of the first Australians to do the 1,000 mile on foot if I get there. Okay, but again, that itself isn't that important to me. Yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say that there's a part of me that wants to scream out, check me out, come and see how good I am. But I'm trying not to use that to influence what I'm doing because other people have done it. There's people who've done it 6 times. So really, if I go and say I'm the first person to do it here, again, I'm just picking data points to try and increase my status or increase how important I think I am to other people. And again, it's just a perception, that side of it anyway. And then the status around it was highlighted to me a little bit because one of my children was doing a presentation for their school. It was more around just doing presentation stuff and they used the race as their presentation. So it's good to see that, my children are proud of me and they have a little bit of interest in what I'm doing. And we were looking at who had completed the race previously, the one I'd already done, which was a 350 mile. And there's a couple of people that have completed on foot from Australia. So we put down that I'd done it and a few other Australians. And I couldn't help but go and have a look to see when they did it because there was a part of me that looked at it and I had to pull myself up and go, you know what, who cares if 50 Australians have done it? It's not really that important. I'm not going to build my status or my importance around that race. So we see it a lot in other things as well. People will talk about doing events. So you see it in sports, you see it in accomplishments, you see it in achievements, all these sort of things. In a lot of things we do, people will talk about being the youngest. They'll talk about being the first. They'll talk about being the fastest. They'll talk about being unsupported. They'll find a data point or they'll find something that increases their status or makes them more important or the best. The problem with that is that a lot of those points are going to be beaten at some point. And then if that's what you use as your status, where are you going to be from there? But status itself is something that is important to us, and it goes back to sort of primitive survival and evolutionary stuff, because if we had increased status, and back then it was about being able to contribute something or being of more importance or being an elder, being wiser, these sort of things, but if we had increased status, then that gave us better access to food, it gave us better access to shelter, in our perception it would make us more attractive to better mates, so it gave us a lot of advantages and opportunities within these environments, and it still does today, that don't exist for people of lower status. So we seek status because we feel or we perceive that it's going to give us access to better things, and ultimately it does. So even when we look at where we are these days, a lot of what we do has actually increased around how we look for status or how we portray our status. So when you look at social media, that's just a competition in who can get the most status. So when we look at likes, we look at the likes we get compared to other people to see how our status compares to theirs. And if they're getting more than us, then we feel or we have mental anguish because we perceive ourselves as being lower status. If we're at lower status, that puts us at risk of having less opportunity, getting less of the things that we want from our environment, and it puts us at a disadvantage to other people. If we look at followers, all these sort of metrics, a lot of it's around status. And the risk with that is that status is something that ebbs and flows on these things. And they're designed almost like a lottery, so that sometimes you'll get increased status, sometimes you won't. And there's actually some neuroscience around that sort of reward prediction error and varied reward that keeps people going back to it or gets them addicted. So whether it's by design, and I don't really do coincidence, is that these things are designed to be almost you gambling with your status. So some days you'll get rewarded, some days you'll get punished, and it keeps you coming back. But we can't just focus on this status, because that then changes our behaviors. So things that we get rewarded for when it comes to looking at increasing our status are going to manipulate or influence our behaviors for next time we go and do something. So just say I post something about being the first Australian to attempt it, and that gets a heaps of likes, it gets shares or whatever it gets, is that then that gets rewarded. So to me, that's like, okay, well, now my behavior needs to change to focus on this. So I start to become more aligned to that person or to that identity, and then I show less focus on the other things which may actually be more important to me. And then if I'm not living in congruence with what's important to me, and I've spoken about identity and values before, then I start to get this internal conflict, which is going to create its own mental anguish. It's going to create complexity, it's going to create the issues in my life, and it's all self-created by the way that I'm looking to increase my status. So we need to be aware that status is something that is important to us, but we can't just solely focus on chasing status. Okay, so we can't just chase status through likes, through followers, through the amount of financial income we have, through the positions of influence we can get, through the hierarchical positions within our organizations we can achieve, the assets that we can get. All these sort of things are all signaling our status. And even people that talk about status isn't important to them are somewhat signaling that they're better than you because they're not worried about status. So it's important to everybody. It's important to me, but I just try not to let it manipulate or influence too much of the behaviors that I do. I understand that status is important. It's just not something that I need to pursue my whole life, or it doesn't have more importance than some of the other things. So I guess the takeaway from this is have a look through what you're doing. Have a look at through your online identity. Have a look at how you're pursuing things, and are you pursuing things based on status? Because if you're pursuing status and that's changing the way that you're behaving, it's changing the way that you interact, then that could be creating a lot of your mental anguish or your emotional pain. So if you can align your behaviors and kind of be happy with the status you've got, or understand that at some point you're going to have enough, you don't need to keep pursuing everything, then you can declutter your life. You can remove some of the actions, some of the behaviors that aren't really important to you, that are around chasing this status that you don't need, and then you can remove the pain that you're inflicting on yourself. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit about status. Yes, status is important, but it's not something that you need to solely focus on. The people that are out there trying to find too much status are likely moving away from something. There's something that they're afraid of, or there's a scarcity, and they're trying to avoid that more so than increase their status. So if you can identify what it is that you're afraid of, or the scarcity, then you can focus on that rather than focus on trying to get everything that you can and become the most influential person that you can be. So I hope that helps, gives you something to think about, and I'll talk about a little bit around sort of identity and goals and status as we go forward. So I hope you enjoyed that one, and I look forward to the next presentation.